Hi everyone. As we've already discussed in our Google meeting today, we are starting the study of Texas by looking at its geography. As a reminder, geography is the study of physical and human characteristics of places and regions. So one of the tools that we use the most in geography are maps. And we're going to take a few minutes here to look at a series of maps and discuss what the geography of Texas is. Just as a warning, if we were in class in person, face to face, as I was showing you these maps, I'd be asking you questions, expecting you to explain what those maps are to me, answering questions of predictions. That's a little hard to do when I'm giving you a video. So I'm still going to ask the questions, and I'm going to want you to at least think about the answers. So there will be times when I may pause for a few seconds to give you some think time. All right, so here we have two maps, one showing the United States in relationship to Canada and Mexico, and then we have a map of the United States focused on the state of Texas. And of course, the state of Texas is where we live, and that's why we're studying it. Okay, so let's start here. What physical features do you see? Now, you should have learned the term physical features last year. That would be things that you see on the earth if there are no human beings. So what are some physical features that we see? Hopefully you're at least answering in your head, if not out loud. An example of physical features would be the mountains that we see here. The rivers, the lakes, oceans, Gulf of Mexico, but also this flat area here. You might think, well, that's just land. Well, yes, but that land, remember, is called plains, those flat, level areas of land that tend to be really good for farmland. Okay, so as we are going through these other maps, I want you to think about the weather and climate of Texas. So again, if we were in class, I'd be stopping and asking you guys to either discuss in your groups or as a whole, what is the weather and climate of Texas? But first, let's distinguish between weather and climate. Weather is what's going on right now. It's raining today. That's today's weather. Climate is what it's like over a long period of time. So if you live in an area that gets a lot of rain, then your climate is rainy. But on the other hand, if you live in an area that gets very little rain, you might have a dry climate. Does that mean you never get any rain? No, of course not. You'll have rainy days. That's the weather for that day. But the climate overall is dry. And as we look at some things about Texas, you're going to find areas of Texas, regions of Texas that are very dry. And then you will find regions of Texas that get quite a bit of rainfall. Okay, now this type of map is called an elevation map because it is focused on the height of the land. Notice the closer we get to the water, the lower the land elevation is, because that's what we talk about when we mean sea level, which would basically be where the water and the land meet each other. So that would be 0 feet of elevation. So as we look at the colors, green of course means low elevation. Moving over here to this kind of orange brown, that means high elevation. So when we look at Texas, what do you see? Okay, so we have areas of low elevation over here in East Texas. But as we move to the west, what happens to the elevation of Texas? Elevation rises. The land gets higher. So if someone were to ask you where are the mountains in Texas, over here in West Texas, Davis Mountains, Edwards Plateau. A plateau, remember, is an area of flat land at a high elevation. It's like a mountain that's had the top cut off. Okay, so again, Texas, low elevation here in the east, but as you move to the west, it gets higher and higher till you get to the highest elevations over here in the West Texas. All right, here are some of the rivers of Texas. The Rio Grande, right down here. The Red River is the one that's the border between Texas and Oklahoma. The Brazos River right here. Colorado River. And the Nueces River is right in here as well. There are a lot of other rivers in Texas, and you will need to know them historically speaking. And of course, we have our own river that runs through Fort Worth. Does anyone know the name of it? That's correct. It is the Trinity River. You guys, I feel really funny asking you questions and then just pretending like you answered. Okay, so as you look at this map, you will see the higher elevation here. Which part of Texas is that? West Texas, to the lower elevation. So if you had a river in Texas, which direction would it run? Would it run from east to west, or would it run from west to east? Would it run from north to south? Excuse me, north to south or south to north? Okay, hopefully most of you figured out that rivers in Texas tend to generally run from the northwest to the southeast. If we go back and look at those rivers, you can kind of tell that pretty easily. All right, this is a precipitation map. What does precipitation mean? Both rainfall and snowfall. Of course, we don't have a lot of snowfall in Texas, but we get some. So, where do you get the most rain in Texas? Well, if you come over here and look at our key, that really bright pinky purple there, fuchsia, if you want to be precise, is above 54 inches. Whereas this really dark kind of brick red is under 14 inches. So which part of Texas gets the most rain? And guys, if you can't remember, do your little mental map compass. North, east, south, west. Never eat something. Yeah, you guys have been taught all sorts of things. So which area of Texas has the most rainfall? That would be East Texas right here along the Gulf Coast. That makes sense because you have the storms and waters moving in off the Gulf Coast. Which area of Texas has the least amount of rainfall? Well, over here in the mountain area. And again, that makes the most sense. This is not very near water at all, except for the Rio Grande River. And another thing that affects precipitation is your elevation. A lot of times the higher elevations are drier areas as well. This is just another precipitation map. It just kind of shows you the same information without breaking it down into as many categories. But again, you get a lot of rain here, some rain here, a little bit less, and then it begins to get pretty dry. Okay, now, what's the other thing we know about climate? Well, it has to do with how hot or how cold it is. And anyone who lives in Texas will pretty much tell you that we have a hot climate, particularly compared to some other places. But even within Texas itself, there are some variations. If it says average annual temperature, remember average is when you take numbers, add them up, and divide. So if you were to say, take the temperature for every day of the year, add it all up, divide by 365, that would give you your average annual temperature. So the darkest red, above 75 degrees, and that basically means that it never gets particularly cold there. And then as we move here, where then do you see it being the coldest? Okay, in the north. Does that make the most sense? I mean, we already know the further north you go, the cooler it gets. So when it says the average is 50 to 55, that does not mean that it doesn't get hot up here, because it does. It just means it also gets correspondingly colder in the winter. Now, over here in West Texas, why do you suppose we have these little areas of yellow? Okay, those are the mountains. And remember, hopefully you learned this last year in geography, the higher you get, the higher your elevation is, the cooler it is. Okay, aquifer was one of the vocabulary words that we talked about. Remember, it's that underground source of water. Page 23 in your textbook, which I showed you, tells you some more information about Texas lakes and aquifers, so be sure you look at that page. Okay, so here we go. Just the Trinity, Edwards. These are just places that Texans get water. We use groundwater quite a bit. And then here we have rivers and lakes. And what do you notice about the lakes when it comes to the rivers? How are they related? Okay, so in Texas, there's only one natural lake. All of the rest of the lakes in Texas are man-made lakes, and they are made by building dams across the rivers and having the water spread out into these lakes. So the relationship between lakes and rivers is that the lakes are created by damming up the rivers. And again, notice that the rivers pretty much flow from northwest to southeast. Okay, just real quick, some examples of the rivers. The Gulf of Mexico, islands, Galveston Island, South Padre Island. There's another example of an aquifer, the Ogallala. Edwards Aquifer, Edwards Plateau, which is that kind of area here towards West Texas that is high elevation, but flat land. Then we have the Davis Mountains. I circled the names of the rivers to make it a little bit easier to see them. And Guadalupe Peak. That's the highest mountain in Texas. So, how do the landforms, weather, climate, and water resources affect life in Texas? Think about that for a few minutes. I'm going to stop this video now, and then there's going to be an assignment you're going to do based on this video. And then I'm going to have a second video to explain about the regions of Texas. Be sure you watch video 2 after you finish your assignment based on this video.